Hey y'all, I'm back trying to multitask. One more William Cooper. We're gonna start. We're in chapter 9. It was the culmination of all man's efforts to survive through history. It was modern medicine, better diets, heat in winter, pure running water, and proper disposal of sewage. It was the point in history when the birth rate so exceeded the death rate that the world's population doubled between 1957 and 1990. It was the most wonderful time in the history of the world, but it was also the worst. It signaled the end of man's most precious achievement. An alliance of all the powers on earth, open and hidden, decided that individual freedoms could no longer be tolerated in the interest of the preservation of the human race. They believed the common man could not be trusted. What had been unfulfilled, what had been the unfulfilled dream of many individual groups became reality by the concentration of power in the alliance known as the Bilderberg Group. What had been impossible before was now promised. The New World Order that so many had envisioned was now a certainty. The first study was made during World War II to determine the impact of the returning soldiers upon the economy. The results mobilized the ruling elite. A second secret study was conducted in 1957 by scientists meeting in Huntsville, Alabama. It confirmed the results of the first. The conclusion was that civilization as we know it would collapse shortly after the year 2000 unless the population was seriously curtailed. The study expressed a concern that since atomic weapons existed, they would ultimately be used. Total worldwide disarmament was urged. Congress adopted the disarmament plan and created the U.S. Disarmament Agency. President Dwight David Eisenhower had this to say in 1957: as a result of lowered infant mortality, longer lives, and the accelerating conquest of famine, there is underway a population explosion so incredibly great that in little more than another generation, the population of the world is expected to double. A third study was made by the Club of Rome, ending in 1968, to determine the limits to growth. The result was the same. The Club of Rome was commissioned to develop a computer model of the world so as to predict the outcome of corrections made to social and economic structures by the elect. The Club of Rome was also asked to develop a computer model of a new world order. Both tasks were accomplished. Studies were done to determine a method to arrest the population explosion before the point of no return would be reached. It was determined that an immediate attack on the problem would involve 2 points of intervention. The first was to lower the birth rate, and the second was to increase the death rate. To lower the birth rate, several programs were put into motion. The first was the development of positive birth control methods using mechanical diaphragm condom, chemical foaming birth control pills, and medical sterilization, abortion, and hysterectomy procedures. These were developed and implemented. The women's liberation movement was started with the demand for free abortions using pro-choice as its rallying cry. Homosexuality was encouraged and gay liberation was born. Homosexuals do not have children. Zero population growth became a hot subject at cocktail parties. Individual freedom, the heat of the moment, religion, and the old blue laws sabotaged these efforts. And while zero population growth became a reality in some areas, population increased rapidly in others. The only alternative left to the world's ruling elite was to increase the death rate. This was a difficult thing to do, as no one wanted to pick people out of a crowd and line them up for execution. Neither did they relish the possible consequences of an enraged public upon discovering that they were being systematically murdered. Of course, a very short but very deadly global war using nuclear weapons upon select population concentrations was contemplated, and to tell you the truth, was not ruled out. The fact that such a population control was even contemplated confirmed the worst fears of those who had participated in the 1957 studies. War was put on the back burner to simmer, but may become a reality. In the meantime, something else had to be done that would absolve the decision makers of guilt and place the blame on those who did not lead clean lives. Something that could be blamed upon Mother Nature. What was needed was the bubonic plague or some other horrible but natural disease. The answer came from Rome. Several top secret recommendations were made by Dr. Aurelio Passi of the Club of Rome. He advocated that a plague be introduced that would have the same effect as the famous Black Death of history. The chief recommendation was to develop a microbe which would attack the autoimmune system and thus render the development of a vaccine impossible. The orders were given to develop the microbe and to develop a prophylactic and a cure. The microbe would be used against the general population and would be introduced by vaccine. The prophylactic was to be used by the ruling elite. The cure will be administered to the survivors when it is decided that enough people have died. The cure will be announced as newly developed when in fact it has existed from the beginning. This plan is a part of Global 2000. The prophylactic and the cure are suppressed. Man has skyrocketed from a defensive position, largely subordinated to nature's alternatives, to a new and dominant one. From it, he not only can and does influence everything in the world, but voluntarily or unwittingly can and indeed does determine the alternatives of his own future, and ultimately must choose his options for it. In other words, his novel power condition practically compels him to take up new regulatory functions that, willy-nilly, he has had to discharge with respect to the world's mixed natural human systems, having penetrated a number of the erstwhile mysteries and being able to sway events massively. He is now vested with unprecedented, tremendous responsibilities and thrown into the new role of moderator of life on the planet, including his own. The above words were written by Dr. Aurelio Passi and are taken verbatim from page 607 of the Global 2000 report to the President. Wow, so he wrote a book. Funding was obtained from the U.S. Congress under HB 15090 1969, where $10 million was given to the DoD's 1970 budget. Testimony before the Senate committee revealed that they intended to produce a synthetic biological agent, an agent that does not naturally exist, for which no natural immunity could have been acquired. Within the next 5 to 10 years, it would probably be possible to make new infective microorganisms, which could differ in certain important aspects from any known disease-causing organisms. Most important of these is that it might be refractory to the immunological, and therapeutic processes upon which we depend to maintain our relative freedom from infectious disease. Sir Julian Huxley said overpopulation is, in my opinion, the most serious threat to the whole future of our species. The project, called MK Naomi, was carried out at Fort Detrick, Maryland. And I'm trying to think where I've heard MK Naomi. Negroes are only meant something. Okay, we're going to look that up. Since large populations were to be decimated, the ruling elite decided to target the undesirable elements of society. Specifically targeted were black, Hispanic, and homosexual populations. The poor homosexuals were encouraged on one hand and scheduled for extinction on the other. The African continent was affected via smallpox vaccine in 1977. The vaccine was administered by the World Health Organization, according to Dr. Robert Strecker. Without a cure, the entire black population of Africa will be dead within 15 years. Some countries are well beyond epidemic status. The U.S. population was infected in 1978 with the hepatitis B vaccine. Dr. Wolf Smunis, the ex-roommate of Pope John Paul II, was the mastermind behind the November 78 to October 79 and March 80 to October 81st experimental hepatitis B vaccine trials conducted by the Centers for Disease Control in New York, San Francisco, and 4 other American cities. He loosed the plague of AIDS upon the American people. The gay population was infected. The ad for participants specifically asked for promiscuous homosexual male volunteers. Whatever causes AIDS was in the vaccine. The vaccine was manufactured and bottled in Phoenix, Arizona. The order was given by the Policy Committee of the Bilderberg Group, based in Switzerland. Other measures were also ordered. The one you will be able to check the easiest is the Hague-Kissinger depopulation policy, which is administered by the State Department. This policy dictates that third world nations take positive and effective steps to decrease their populations and hold them in check, or they get no aid from the United States. If the third world nations refuse, civil war usually breaks out, and the rebels are usually found to be trained, armed, and financed by the Central Intelligence Agency. That is why more civilians, especially young, fertile females, than soldiers have been killed in El Salvador, Nicaragua, and other places. These wars have been instigated in Catholic countries by Jesuits. See Chapter 2 on Jesuits. The Hague-Kissinger depopulation policy has taken over various levels of government and is, in fact, the determining U.S. foreign policy. The planning organization operates outside the White House and directs its entire efforts to reduce the world's population by 2 billion people through war, famine, disease, and any other means necessary. This group is the National Security Council's ad hoc group on population policy. The policy planning staff is in the State Department's Office of Population Affairs, established in 1975 by Henry Kissinger. This same group drafted the Global 2000 report to the president that was given to Carter. Thomas Ferguson, the Latin American case officer for the State Department's Office of Population Affairs, OPA, made the following statements. There is a single theme behind all our work. We must reduce population levels. Either they do it our way through nice and clean methods, or they will get the kind of mess that we have in El Salvador or in Iran or in Beirut. Population is a political problem. Once population is out of control, it requires authoritarian government, even fascism, to reduce it. The professionals stated Ferguson are interested in lowering population for humanitarian reasons. That sounds nice. We look at resources and environmental constraints. We look at our strategic needs and we say that this country must lower its population or else we will have trouble. So steps are taken. El Salvador is an example where our failure to lower population by simple means has created the basis for national security crisis. The government of El Salvador failed to use our programs to lower their population. Now they get civil war because of it. There will be dislocation and food shortages. They still have too many people there. Peace and power.